Okay, time for an update on the big ugly forklift project. This is the motor, the old motor, out of the machine on the engine stand. There's a crankshaft. There's all the goodies from the inside, pistons, rods, etc. Anyway, I managed to find another complete 245 engine. However, it has spun a main bearing, and it actually, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but it was this one right here. So this is the old motor. The bottom end on this motor is fine, but the motor that I sourced had a spun main. So I took it to the machine shop. They're going to line bore it for me, and then they're probably going to go ahead and bore out the cylinders. The motor that I purchased is 20 thousandths over already. It's worn to about 30 thousandths, so we're going to probably bore it to 40 thousandths. This motor here has already been bored to 60 thousandths, so there's no more bore in this one. Plus it's got the crack in it anyway. So I'm going to take the two motors, try to get one out of them. So the oil pump drive runs right through this main cap. In my mind, that's probably a weak spot in the main cap, or that main bearing anyway, and I suspect that's what caused the problem. Anyway, I took the cap off of this machine, or off this motor. This cap was good, so they're probably going to try to fit. I don't know if they'll be able to fit the cap off this motor to the other motor. Hopefully the dowel pins are the same. If they're not, they'll have to just grind the mating face of that other cap so that it moves the bore closer to the head, and then they'll line bore it, and it'll be right as rain after that. The only thing is the piston protrusion will be a little bit higher, so I'll have to check the clearance on the head when I go to put the motor back together, but not a big deal. So anyway, yeah, basically this motor is going to be scrapped out. I don't see any reason to save it. Fixing that crack in the block would cost more than, much more than the machine work to fix this other motor, so I'm not even going to bother. So if anybody needs some parts for a 245 or a 227 Continental, there's going to be some available. Okay, this is the final drive off the right hand side of the machine, and what you're looking at, that's the input shaft for the final drive, so that comes off the differential, and right here is a floating disc. So it's actually a disc brake, and then underneath of this cast iron disc is a friction material. So there's a caliper, and I'll swing around and get a better view of it inside the final drive housing. And yeah, the caliper pushes the disc and squeezes that friction material, and that's your brake. So that's if you've ever worked on a farmall tractor, that's pretty much how their brakes work. It's pretty common in industrial equipment for them to do that. It's a little more compact, and so the big problem is the disc is seized on the splines, so it can't float, and then the friction material is also rusted to the face of the final drive. So I wedged my air hammer chisel in there pretty good, and then I soaked down the splines with some Croil, so I'll let it sit overnight, and hopefully it'll pop loose. If not, we're probably going to have to introduce some heat to get that freed up. And then yeah, new disc, probably new friction material, and then I don't know if you can see it, but that's the disc right there. It's got these 3 pucks, so each one of those is a cylinder, and it doesn't look like it's been leaking at all, so maybe I can get away with not rebuilding the caliper and just replace those pucks. So yeah, getting that off there is a real pain in the ass, but it's not that bad. Alright, so what we're looking at here is the torque converter, and this is the flex plate that bolts to the flywheel, and you can see 1, 2, 3 of the mounting holes actually broke completely off the flex plate. So I don't know if there's a misalignment problem, or if that's just some kind of a fatigue issue, or I don't know, didn't tighten the bolts up, or they didn't center the flex plate. I don't know, but definitely gonna need a new flex plate, and I've got to call the dealer, and hopefully that part is available. If not, I'll have to make one, but I suspect it's probably some kind of tempered steel, and that would be a pain in the ass. Also, the radiator has a leak, so I'm going to go ahead and see if I can get that patched up. I'm going to take that down to the radiator shop and let them pressurize it and take a look. It's a pretty big radiator, and also there is a oil cooler for the transmission built in, so it's a little more complicated than just your bog standard radiator. So the last thing that I found that's all jacked up is the steering mechanism. So the way this works, this linkage right here comes from the steering box, and that's directly connected to the steering wheel, and it goes into a little sliding, basically, control valve. And so when you turn the steering wheel, it pulls that link, actuates the control valve, and then that's what actuates the actual cylinder right here for the power steering. So the problem is a couple things. So from here at the back of that control valve to this ball joint, it's got a hell of a dog leg in it. So it looks like it must have been bent. I don't know if they crashed it or ran it into something or what. And then I don't know if you're able to see it, but there's actually like a cut. It's almost halfway through that linkage. So I got to pull that out of there and take a look. And most likely I'm going to end up making a new one of those. It also looks to me like, yeah, at the back of this control valve there's probably supposed to be like an internal thread and then some kind of a clamp that clamps onto that linkage so you can adjust it. And it looks like they just globbed on a bunch of weld. And then finally, take a look at this yoke right here that the steering actually mounts to, or sorry, that the linkage actually runs down to. I'm going to try to turn the steering wheel and hold this camera steady and see if you can see what I'm seeing. Yeah, it's got a little weeble wobble. So I took the bearing cap off this yoke, and it looks like they replaced the bearings, but something's wrong with this kingpin or spindle or whatever you want to call it, and I'm not really sure how that all goes together. It probably just slips through the axle from the bottom. So I don't know if I can just take this apart and see if it needs to be tightened, but probably the bore is all wallowed out. So that's not an easy thing to fix. Probably the best way to do it would be just take the whole back axle out. There's basically a pivot joint here and here that lets the axle equalize, and I think I can take that apart, take the steering linkage loose, and then just scoot the whole axle out the back end. But yeah, that's going to be a big job. So I think in the military they would refer to that as mission creep. Yeah, we got a lot of mission creep going on with this machine. So that's the update for now.